Hello and welcome to SiComponents YouTube channel. Today we'll expand on our previous video where we covered the basics of what Delphi and Object Pascal are. We also took a look at how to declare the variables within Delphi and briefly discussed the structure and the sections of the code in Delphi. If you haven't seen the previous video or want to revise, you can find a link to it in the description. In today's video we'll dive deeper and learn how to write and use conditionals in Delphi. We'll cover the most common types of conditionals such as if else, and the case conditional. Let's dive right in. Just like last time, our starting point is that you have opened Delphi already and picked a new Windows VCL application project, and now you have this empty form in front of you. We'll start incorporating our knowledge into building something visual and more interactive in the next videos. For now, let's navigate to the code section of this unit. If this looks entirely new to you, make sure to check out our previous video where we talked about the structure and the sections of this code. Conditional statements are used to structure and to execute your instructions based on certain conditions. Self-explanatory, right? They're conditional statements after all. These conditions can be nearly everything. Some of the most basic examples are comparing if a variable has a certain value, for example if num1 is equal to 2, or comparing two variables together, so if that's two integers or two floats or two real numbers or two strings. Even though these conditions will change and become more advanced as you start developing more advanced code, the logic will stay exactly the same throughout. So now let's start actually coding so we can learn by doing. As I said before, conditions check or compare something, therefore there needs to be a condition for it to be a conditional statement. So for practice purposes, we'll declare two variables of integer type within the var section. Let's call them num1 and num2. Notice how we're declaring both num1 and num2 in a single line by just listing them with the use of comma. You can do that for as many variables as you want as long as each one of those variables is of the same type. So we can have 10 num1s through 10 and all of them being an integer, and that will work. But if in our case, if num1 would be a string and num2 would still be an integer, that wouldn't work. To do it for strings, you can do it just the same way. So for example, you can declare string 1 and string 2 on a different line, also listing them with a comma, and they will be of a type string. Alright, now that we have our variables, let's assign some sample values to it so we can start writing our conditionals. Let's assign a value of num to num1 and a value of 2 to num2 in the implementation section. The structure for a very simple if conditional is like this. By the way, notice that we can use double slash to comment out the code so we can experiment first before writing an actual code so we don't get any compiling mistakes. So the structure is very simple. First we say if, after the if we state our condition and then followed by a keyword then. The result of the statement of our condition will be in form of a boolean, so either true or false. Either the condition is true or it's false. If the condition is true, then the program will execute the instructions that we write based on these conditions. To write the instructions, we need to write them after the then keyword, but now here there's a small point to discuss before we move on. If you have only one line of instruction, then you don't necessarily need a local pair of begin-end within the if conditional, because that will still work. Your compiler will not find any issues and your code will run properly. But if you were to write more than just one line of instructions, then only that first line will be dependent on the outcome of the conditional that you write. So for example, if you want the code to execute only when the condition is false, only the first instruction will be dependent on that, while all other instructions within the same conditional will be executed regardless because the compiler will not regard them as part of the conditional statement. So therefore it is better to be consistent and always use a local pair of begin and end in a conditional statement. So now let's write an actual condition so we can remove the double slash at the beginning so it's an actual piece of code. And let's say our condition will be that we want to check if num1 is smaller than 2, and if it is true then we want to show message true. For that we need to basically write num1 less than num2, then show message, and in brackets a string of true. Let's run the code and see the process. As you can see, it executes the instruction and shows us the message true because the condition is true. But what if we want to add some more instructions dependent on the handler that if the condition is false, then we do something different with our code? This is where else comes to our rescue. But before adding an else, we need to remove a semicolon from the end of our if conditional, otherwise the compiler will see it as a mistake. So then we can simply write else with no condition because we do it regardless, only in the case of the if condition being false, so that's its condition essentially. And same approach here in terms of the begin-end pair, and let's say that if our condition is false, we want to show message false. Let's now change our initial condition to checking if num1 is bigger than num2, so we know it's false for sure, and run the code and to see if it's actually gonna work. As you can see, now it shows false as the else instruction is executed. A cool thing and a point where everything starts to come together is that we can combine if with not just an else but also an else if condition. Else if conditional is just another if conditional that will be checked for only if all the previous ifs are false, or else ifs. With the use of combining if conditionals with if, else and else, you can build very complex and advanced conditional structures that can handle nearly every single condition you want. So in the case of our simple example, let's add an else if after our first if, and here we'll check if the two numbers are equal. Therefore, after if, we write else if, then our condition checking the numbers are equal to each other, and then let's show message equal. Let's modify the values of our numbers to check if it works, and set them both equal to 2 and run the code. As you can see, the first if is false, therefore the instructions for it are not executed, and the else if is checked, returns true, and that's where we see a message equal on our screen because it executes the instructions while else is ignored, which once again shows that else is executed only if all the previous ifs and else ifs are false. Before we wrap up our today's tutorial, let's take a look at a bit more advanced conditional called the case-off iteration. This method is very useful if you know the range of values that a variable can have prior to actually completing the entire application and want to execute certain code depending on what they are. In our example, let's say we want to show message 1 if num1 is equal to 1 or 2 if num1 is equal to 2. It is not a so smart and practical application, but it will easily demonstrate to you how to use the case conditional. We simply begin by writing case, and Delphi will assist you with auto-completing the default template for the conditional. So in the place of true, we write the variable that we want to base the values on. In our case, it is num1. Then we begin to list the possible values and what to do in that case, so our conditions. Let's say if it is 1, we want to show a message. If it is 2, we want to show message 2. We can also do something if the number is in range of values. For example, we want to show that it's double digit, like show message double digit, if a number has double digits. We can declare it like so. Let's now set the value of num1 to 2 and run the code to see it shows the respective message, 2. And lastly, let's change it to 12 and run the code again to now see that it shows a different message, double digit. We have covered plenty today. We looked at the simple if conditionals and then explored how you can reach more advanced levels by combining it with else if and else conditionals. We also quickly looked at the case conditional, and in the next video we'll dive into how to use loops in Delphi, so make sure to subscribe to not miss out on that. In the meantime, check out our blog posts on our website and follow us on LinkedIn.